Shaquille Dalton hadn't walked through the doors of his own downtown jewelry branch in over a decade. He had built the empire from scratch, each store a stone in the foundation of a legacy forged in silence. Over the years, he had become a legend among his employees, revered not for appearances but for results, the architect of an empire so refined, so precise, that it felt untouchable. He was the kind of man who built palaces out of discipline and ruled them without needing a throne. But now, as he stood in front of the glass doors of the flagship location, coated in gold filigree, its pristine windows reflecting the sharp midday sun, there was something different in the air. His return wasn't planned, nor was it for fanfare. Shaq never cared for grand gestures. He was here for answers, answers he couldn't delegate, answers he couldn't ignore any longer. It had started with a report, minor, almost invisible, a small discrepancy in the quarterly inventory from the downtown branch, a few missing gemstones, one misfiled ledger, and a total just shy enough to feel like an oversight. But Shaquille Dalton didn't believe in oversights. The math never lied. It was people who did. The numbers had spoken in silence, a language he'd learned long ago, and that silence echoed louder than any voice on his executive team. No one knew he was coming, not even his assistant Janet, who had always been his shield from the day-to-day noise. He had left the penthouse quietly, dressing in a tailored navy suit with the kind of minimal flair that whispered wealth without shouting it. His shoes hit the pavement with purpose, not anger. He wasn't there yet, just control. The store was quiet when he entered. The bell above the door chimed softly, but no one looked up right away. The floor sparkled beneath his feet, the cases glistened, and the scent of fresh-cut white roses lingered faintly in the air. This was his brand, his world. But for the first time, it felt unfamiliar. It felt tainted. A woman stepped from behind the emerald-cut display case, clipboard in hand, her voice smooth like velvet. "Welcome to Dalton Lux. How can I assist you today?" Shaq didn't respond immediately. His gaze traveled across the room, taking in the staff, the layout, the movement. Everything was immaculate, too immaculate. He studied her, tall, poised, her dark red lipstick perfectly applied. She looked confident, competent, but she wasn't the reason he was here. He was waiting for someone else. And in that moment, she walked in, Linda Hayes. Linda moved with the kind of polished grace that couldn't be taught, only cultivated. Her suit was sharp, her expression relaxed. The deputy director of the downtown flagship branch. She had climbed ranks fast, maybe too fast. Her reviews had always been stellar, her sales team loved her, and yet, Shaq saw it in the way her eyes darted ever so slightly when she saw him. Not recognition, he had made sure of that, but caution. An instinctive twitch in her shoulder, a subtle tightening of her jaw. "Looking for something specific, sir?" she asked, stepping forward with a carefully curated smile. Shaq's voice was calm. "Something rare." Linda's eyes sparkled. "A man with taste. We just received a new collection. Burmese rubies. Rare. Clean cuts. Only 3 sets like it in the world." "Perfect." She led him toward the display case near the back, her heels clicking like a metronome. As they walked, Shaq observed everything, her cadence, her speech, the way her fingers brushed the velvet box before lifting the lid. She was trained, yes, polished, but he had built a company on more than appearances. And something in her manner reeked of performance. She opened the case with a flourish. Each stone was independently certified. "This piece alone," she gestured toward the centerpiece, "is valued at 2.6 million." Shaq nodded, as if weighing the offer. "And how long has this collection been here?" "Just over 4 weeks," Linda replied without hesitation. Interesting. The report had mentioned a 2-week discrepancy. Either she had forgotten the real date, or she was lying. He leaned in slightly, peering over the gemstones. It's beautiful. The way the light hits the core, you almost forget how sharp it really is. Linda tilted her head, puzzled by the comment. Gemstones, like people, Shaq continued, don't always show you their flaws at first glance. There was a pause, just a beat. But in that silence, Shaq saw it. A flicker of discomfort, quickly masked by a smile. May I ask who referred you to our store? She asked. Shaq straightened slowly. Let's just say I've always had a personal connection to the Dalton brand. He left it hanging there, waiting, watching her process the ambiguity. Her confidence didn't waver, but her posture shifted slightly, shoulders back, eyes scanning him a little deeper. If you'd like, I can speak to our director. No need, Shaq interrupted. You've been more than helpful, Ms. Hayes. It was the first time he'd used her name, and it landed like a small, silent detonation. Her lips twitched, her pupils constricted, but she didn't flinch. She didn't recognize him. Not yet. That was good, because this was only the beginning. He left the store 15 minutes later, a velvet pouch in his breast pocket containing one of the rubies. It wasn't about the purchase. It was about the paper trail. The item had already been filed in the corporate inventory under a different SKU 2 weeks earlier, which meant she'd either changed the tag or was selling assets off book. Back in his penthouse, Shaq sat by the window as the city lights began to bleed into the darkening sky. His fingers traced the gemstone absently, the fire within it catching every sliver of light. This wasn't about one woman or one branch. It was about a culture that had begun to slip inch by inch away from the values he had etched into the foundation of Dalton Lux: integrity, precision, honor. And somewhere, somehow, someone had decided they could bend those rules to serve their own greed. He had always ruled in silence. Let the world speak his name without needing to show his face. But now, silence wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just a business trip, it was the beginning of a reckoning, and Linda Hayes had no idea who had just walked into her store or what storm was coming next. The morning after his quiet return to the downtown flagship store, Shaquille Dalton stood once again before the panoramic windows of his penthouse. The city stretched before him, glittering like a necklace of diamonds, but he no longer saw the beauty. What lay beneath the shine disturbed him far more than he cared to admit. For the first time in years, his empire felt fragile. The ruby he had purchased sat on his desk in its velvet pouch. It wasn't just a gem, it was a question mark, a contradiction. On paper, the sale didn't exist. The SKU didn't match. The serial number was off by just enough to suggest tampering. In isolation, it could be called an administrative error, but Shaq knew better. It was a deliberate fracture in what had once been an unshakable foundation. He didn't rise to power by ignoring his instincts, and right now, they screamed that something more sinister was at play. He spent the next few hours combing through the internal databases of Dalton Lux, a system he had helped design, simple, secure, and ruthlessly efficient. But someone had gotten clever. There were anomalies buried beneath layers of seemingly harmless data: double entries in inventory logs, orders closed before payment, assets shipped without confirmation. None of it overt, all of it intentional. But it was when he cross-checked the purchase dates of high-value items against transfer logs that he found the smoking gun: multiple items listed as on hold for private client review, held indefinitely without sale, without payment, yet slowly disappearing off the books. Linda's name was on 6 of them. He closed the file, the screen going black, and sat in silence for a long while. For most of his life, Shaquille Dalton had built his success on reading people without them knowing. In the room, he was often the quietest, but in his silence, he heard the tremors. He noticed the hesitations in speech, the flickers in the eyes, the subtle ways truth unraveled itself when a person tried to keep it hidden. And now, everything about Linda's polished smile, her poised movements, the way she avoided eye contact just a second too long, it all began to make sense. She wasn't just bending the rules, she was rewriting them for her own benefit. But Shaq wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. There was still a puzzle he needed to piece together, and more than one player on the board. So he picked up his phone and called Janet, his personal assistant and longtime confidant. "Janet," he said, voice low, "I need you to run a background trace on all outgoing inventory transactions from the downtown branch over the last 7 months. Flag anything connected to private collectors, especially if it was marked discretion requested or had any alterations made after closing." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Understood," she said calmly. She knew not to ask questions. In a world like theirs, the truth was never a matter of curiosity, it was a matter of survival. That afternoon, Shaq returned to the store, this time watching from across the street first. He stood in the shadows of a coffee shop window, observing the rhythms of his own creation. Linda moved through the floor with rehearsed grace, offering practiced smiles and curated charm. To the average person, she was an embodiment of the Dalton Lux standard, flawless, polished, and capable. But Shaq watched more than the shine. He watched her interactions with the junior staff, the way her tone shifted slightly when she gave instructions, how she seemed to keep everyone half a step off balance, polite but just short of approachable. She had crafted a kingdom within his kingdom, and she ruled it by making herself indispensable. When he finally stepped back into the store, Linda didn't recognize him again. This time, he wore a charcoal gray coat and a different pair of tinted glasses. His energy was quieter, more aloof. He didn't approach her right away. Instead, he wandered the store, engaging briefly with other salespeople, complimenting the designs, asking about new arrivals. Eventually, Linda approached on her own. "Back again so soon?" she asked, her smile polite but curious. "Couldn't resist the rubies?" Shaq allowed a faint smirk. "Something like that." "What brings you in today?" He paused, as if deliberating. "I have a niece getting married. I'm looking for something significant, not just valuable, something rare, meaningful." Linda's eyes lit up, but not with sentiment, with hunger. "We have just the piece," she said, guiding him toward a small private alcove toward the back of the store, the section reserved for high net worth clients. "It's a Colombian emerald set, antique mount. It was part of our private collection, but we might be able to make an exception." Shaq said nothing, just followed. Once inside the private alcove, she opened a velvet-lined drawer and presented the piece. It was stunning. Deep green stones that seemed to hold the weight of ancient secrets. "Only 3 clients have even seen this," she whispered, as if confiding in a friend. "But something tells me you're not just another client." There it was again, that edge in her voice. Suspicion, laced with calculation. She was probing him, trying to place him. He leaned forward, studying the piece. "You're right. I'm not just another client." A beat passed. "But I am someone who appreciates integrity," he added softly. "And I can usually tell when it's missing." Linda froze, just for a fraction of a second. But that was all he needed. She recovered quickly. "I'm not sure I understand." "You don't have to," he said, straightening. "You just need to keep showing me who you are." He left the alcove, leaving the emerald set untouched, and walked out without another word. By the time he returned to his penthouse, Janet had sent the flag transaction list to his encrypted inbox. It was worse than he thought. Over $4.3 million in assets unaccounted for across 6 months, all routed through the downtown branch. And while Linda's name wasn't on every single form, her digital signature appeared more than any other manager's. She was either the ringleader or someone's puppet. Either way, she was dirty. Shaq closed the file and sat back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a betrayal, and not just of him, but of the values Dalton Lux had always stood for. For the young saleswoman who came in early to polish display glass by hand, for the gemologist who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to certify and authenticate every stone, for the clients who trusted his brand because he had earned that trust, one detail at a time. Linda wasn't just stealing money, she was poisoning a legacy. And Shaquille Dalton would not let that go unpunished. But he wouldn't rush the confrontation. Not yet. Instead, he made one final call to Marcus Price, a former financial investigator who had helped Shaq expose a high-stakes laundering ring 5 years earlier. Marcus was now working quietly as a private consultant. "I need a silent audit," Shaq said simply. "Full financials. Not just on Linda Hayes, but anyone connected to her inside or outside the company. I want to know who she's protecting and who's protecting her." Marcus understood immediately. "Give me 72 hours. Make it 48, Shaq replied. "We're running out of time." As he hung up the phone, Shaquille Dalton felt something settle in his chest. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. He had built his life around clean lines and unbreakable codes. Now, someone had smudged those lines with dirty fingers, and the time for watching from a distance was nearing its end. Because beneath all the shine, the rot had begun to spread, and Shaq was done waiting. Shaquille Dalton had spent a lifetime navigating boardrooms and backdoor deals, but this felt different. There was a charge in the air, an invisible current humming just beneath the surface of everything, like the seconds before a lightning strike. For the past 2 days, he had operated in shadows, observing, collecting, testing. Now, the moment was drawing near when observation would no longer suffice. The time for revelation was coming, and with it, confrontation. The silent audit Marcus Price had promised arrived early. Shaq sat in his office staring at the compiled report with a stillness that didn't betray the fury building behind his eyes. The findings were undeniable. Linda Hayes had indeed been the architect of the siphoning operation, but she hadn't worked alone. At least 3 other employees had helped her conceal the trails: a warehouse coordinator, a mid-level accountant, and disturbingly, a member of the internal auditing team. Together, they had created a bypass within the system, a loophole that allowed them to move high-value pieces to private buyers, some local, others international. Their signatures were forged or swapped, invoices tampered with, and the jewelry never entered public inventory. One emerald necklace meant for a royal European client had vanished entirely. Shaq had seen it crafted with his own eyes. It had taken a year to design, and now it was gone, because someone like Linda had decided her ambition was worth more than honesty. He traced her name again on the report. She had been clever. Her fingerprints were barely there, always layered beneath others, always filtered through someone else's task. But in every tangled thread she appeared, once as the author of a seemingly routine approval, once as the recipient of a message encrypted with personal delivery instructions, once as the woman who scheduled the warehouse transfer on her day off. Shaq stood up and crossed the room to the window. Outside, the city gleamed like it always had, but to him, the lights were cold. He remembered when he first opened Dalton Lux's downtown store. He had personally chosen the lighting for the front display, the velvet interiors, the curved glass counters that now showcase both his brilliance and his vulnerability. Because while the world saw luxury, perfection, and promise, it had also become a stage for deception, and Linda Hayes had made a performance of it. He took a slow breath and turned back toward his desk. The plan had to move forward, but carefully. If he confronted her too early, she'd vanish. People like her always had escape routes: false IDs, alternate accounts, networks that extended further than anyone realized. But if he waited too long, she might take the final step, dismantle the operation, silence her co-conspirators, and disappear, taking with her millions in legacy and more in trust. Shaq wasn't just chasing restitution, he wanted accountability. So, that evening, he made his choice. He returned to the store again, but this time, he entered not as the mysterious client or the distant executive. He arrived just before closing, unannounced and unguarded, dressed in a sleek navy coat with Dalton Lux's original lapel pin discreetly gleaming on his chest. No sunglasses, no shadows. Linda was at the far end of the showroom, giving final instructions to one of the newer assistants. When she saw him, she paused. Something shifted in her face, just for a second. A flicker of recognition, followed by something colder, calculation. "Well," she said with a slow smile, "you're becoming quite the regular." "I like to know where my money goes," Shaq replied smoothly, stepping closer. "And lately, I've had questions about where some of it's disappearing." There it was, the moment, the moment when the mask begins to tremble. Linda's smile twitched, but didn't falter. "I'm afraid I don't follow." "No?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Let's talk then." Privately, she hesitated. "The store is closing, perhaps another time." "I wasn't asking." He gestured toward the consultation room, a space designed for high-profile transactions, now repurposed as a battleground for truth. Inside, the lights dimmed automatically, casting a soft amber hue across the velvet furniture. Linda walked with an elegant calm, but Shaq noticed her fingers twitch at her side. Nervous. Good. "I'm sure you're very busy," she said, sitting down across from him. "But if this is about inventory or some internal report—" "It's about betrayal," he interrupted. "It's about trust. It's about integrity and what it costs when the wrong people think no one's watching." Silence stretched between them. "You've made mistakes," he said, voice low but sharp. "And you've been lucky. But luck runs out, especially when it's based on theft." "I think you're confused," she said, her tone clipped now. "You're making dangerous accusations." "No," he said, sliding a printed photo across the table. "I'm making informed accusations." It was a still frame, Linda's signature on a form attached to a falsified appraisal, the gem in question, the missing royal emerald. Her eyes locked on the photo, then flicked back up to him. "That could be fake." "Could be," he said. "Except the man who printed it used to build digital security for Interpol. And the data behind that form? It connects to an offshore transaction tied to your name." She didn't speak. "For 5 years, I let this company run on trust," Shaq continued, his voice softening, but not in warmth. "I believed in discretion, in empowering leadership. I built something I thought would outlive me. But then you showed up and decided to rewrite the rules." Linda straightened in her seat. Her poise was perfect, but her eyes betrayed her. Not fear, defiance. "You don't scare me," she said quietly. "You think just because you sign the paychecks, you know what's really happening here? You've been absent. You built an empire, and then you vanished behind tinted glass. The rest of us, I, kept this place running." Shaq stared at her for a long moment. "By stealing from it? By surviving it," she snapped. "This company's success is built on illusion. Luxury is illusion. People want to be fooled. They want to believe they're buying into something untouchable, and I gave it to them." "No," Shaq said, leaning forward, his tone turning cold. "You gave yourself everything you thought you deserved, and you did it with my name above the door." Her eyes narrowed. "So what now? You humiliate me? Fire me in front of the staff? You think you're the only one who can play chess?" Shaq stood, his shadow falling over her. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Linda," he said. "I came to see if there was anything left in you worth saving." He paused, then added quietly, "But I see there isn't." The door opened behind them. Two internal security personnel entered, calm and composed. One held a sealed envelope, Linda's suspension letter, and a notice of internal investigation. The other held a company-issued tablet logged into the forensic audit. Linda didn't move. Her expression hardened into something unrecognizable. Not shame, not regret, just steel. "You'll regret this," she said, voice even. "No," Shaq replied, walking past her. "You will." As he left the room, the staff outside didn't speak. Some looked confused. Others looked relieved. The glass facade of Dalton Lux reflected his face as he stepped outside, the night wind brushing against his skin. He had finally done what he had spent days preparing for, but the feeling wasn't triumph. It was grief, because behind every mask, there is a story. And sometimes the unveiling doesn't reveal a monster, but a person who once had potential and chose power over principle. Shaq didn't hate Linda, but he couldn't save her. She had made her choice, and now he would make his. Tomorrow, the company would know the truth, but tonight, he walked the streets in silence, remembering the cost of empire and the weight of watching someone fall, not because they were pushed, but because they refused to stand for anything real. The morning after the confrontation felt oddly still, the kind of stillness that comes not with peace, but with the breath that the world takes before it begins to shift. Shaquille Dalton stood at the edge of the helipad atop his private tower, the horizon stretching wide in every direction, the city still waking below. He wasn't there to admire the skyline. He was there to think, and perhaps, in some buried part of himself, to steady the storm building in his chest. Linda Hayes was out, suspended, under investigation, and already silenced by a thick non-disclosure agreement to prevent her from influencing the ongoing inquiry. But that wasn't the finish line, not even close. Because what Shaq had discovered in the audit wasn't just a case of personal greed. It was a thread connected to something much deeper, woven into the very infrastructure of Dalton Lux's internal ecosystem. This wasn't just about Linda. She was a node, a visible fracture in a network that had been rotting from the inside. It was time to go deeper. Back in his private office, Shaq met with Marcus Price and Loretta Vance, his newly appointed compliance director. Loretta had been brought in specifically for this moment, an uncompromising former federal investigator with a penchant for hunting financial ghosts. Her reports didn't read like numbers, they read like murder mysteries. And this one had just turned from theft to conspiracy. "There's a pattern in the vault access logs," Loretta said, her voice low and unwavering. Over the past 18 months, certain high-security codes were used outside of designated times, sometimes at 3 a.m., other times during fake maintenance windows. Shaq leaned in. "You're saying they bypassed the vault's internal controls?" "Yes, with help," she replied. "Likely someone in corporate security, possibly tech infrastructure too, and these aren't random pieces being moved. We're talking legacy items, those associated with limited designs, rare stone origins, untraceable once they're out of our hands." Marcus rubbed his temples. "That explains why none of it hit the insurance triggers. The movement was hidden inside authorized intervals. Whoever's behind this, they knew our systems too well." Shaq stared at the digital blueprint on Loretta's screen. A map of transactions, movements, access logs, and at the center of it all, 5 names. Linda Hayes was only the first. The other 4 had avoided suspicion for years, largely because they wore professionalism like armor. But now their fingerprints were showing. He felt it in his gut. This was no longer about damage control. This was a reckoning. "I want access to the vault," Shaq said suddenly. "I want to go down there myself." Marcus and Loretta exchanged glances. "You know it's symbolic, right?" Marcus asked. "You're the CEO. You don't need to descend into the belly of the company to prove a point." "I'm not proving a point," Shaq replied. "I'm remembering what I built, and who tried to bury it." An hour later, They stood in front of the titanium double doors beneath Dalton Lux's flagship headquarters. The vault wasn't just a physical place, it was a monument, designed to hold everything Shaq had once imagined would carry his company's name into legacy. He hadn't stepped inside it in over 5 years. And now, with his fingerprints scanned and his retina verified, the heavy mechanism unlocked with a slow hiss, revealing the world that once made him dream. The scent hit him first: velvet, stone, cool air, and time. Inside, the vault stretched like a cathedral. The lights dimmed automatically, casting a soft golden glow on each secured display. Rings with impossible fire, necklaces crafted with centuries of tradition, stones pulled from deep under the earth, kissed by millions of years of pressure. He walked past rows of cases, past memories, and then he saw it, the empty space. Loretta had shown him the digital list. He knew what was missing. But seeing it, seeing that square of untouched velvet, the engraved plaque beneath it reading, "The Fenmore Flame, not for sale," it hit him differently. This was the piece he had commissioned in honor of his mother, a custom piece using an angle red diamond, one of the rarest in the world. No valuation, no replication, meant to stay with the company forever. Gone. Something cracked quietly inside him. "What kind of person steals legacy?" he whispered. "What kind of person looks at something sacred and sees only price?" Loretta stepped beside him, her voice softer now. "The kind who believes nothing is sacred anymore." They stood in silence. It wasn't just a loss of a jewel, it was a betrayal of intention, of philosophy, of the core values Shaq had tried so hard to protect in an industry too often dominated by illusion. "I want everyone down here re-interviewed," he said at last. "I want psychological profiles, financial reviews, comms history. Anyone with clearance for this level, we dig until there's nothing left to hide." "We've already started," Loretta confirmed. "But there's something else." She opened her tablet, pulling up a security feed time-stamped 3 months ago. A man stood in the far corridor of the vault, face turned from the camera. He wasn't wearing Dalton Lux security attire, and yet he carried the master key, normally stored in a biometric lock, accessed only by two people. One was Shaq himself. The other was Linda Hayes. "She loaned her clearance," Marcus said, "or sold it. That's how they got in." Shaq's mind churned. That man, he looked familiar. Not from within the company, from outside. A former supplier? A disgruntled client? "Run his face," Shaq ordered. "Use government databases if you have to. I want a name, and I want it now." Marcus moved quickly. Within minutes, facial recognition pulled up the file. Name: Ethan Rowe. Ex-operations director of a rival luxury chain, now defunct due to bankruptcy. Fired for undisclosed ethical breaches. No official ties to Dalton Luck, but now a common denominator in 3 international resale auctions. "He's the broker," Loretta said grimly. "He's laundering the stolen jewelry through foreign collectors. And Linda was the gateway." Shaq exhaled slowly. "Then let's shut the gate. Now." That evening, Loretta contacted a federal contact to begin initiating asset recovery. If any pieces were still within borders, they would be seized. If not, they'd be traced. Either way, Ethan Rowe was now a marked man, and Linda's web of deceit had officially unraveled beyond repair. But even as the wheels of justice began to turn, Shaq couldn't shake the weight in his chest. He returned to the vault one more time, alone. He walked its rows like a museum curator mourning stolen art. Every piece here held a memory, a conversation, a sketch, a commission from someone who had trusted Dalton Lux with their milestone. A first anniversary, a coronation, a graduation gift from a father to a daughter who believed she could own the world. And now, some of those stories were gone, traded for money, disrespected. broken. Shaq sat on the edge of one of the benches, his fingers running along the cool marble surface. He remembered his early days, when the vault was an empty room, when the dream was just scribbled napkins and sleepless nights. Somewhere along the way, he had trusted too much, empowered people he thought would protect the vision, and in doing so, he'd allowed a sickness to grow in silence. But now he was done being silent. He reached for his phone and called the company's communications director. "I want a statement drafted," he said. "Internal first, then press. We admit the breach. We admit we trusted the wrong people, and we tell them exactly what we're doing to fix it." "You sure?" the director asked. "There'll be backlash." "There's already backlash," Shaq said. "I'd rather meet it with truth than hide behind spin." He hung up and looked around one last time. The vault hadn't betrayed him. People had. And now, it was time to reclaim every inch of this empire, from the marble floor beneath him to the name engraved above every storefront window. The truth wasn't just in the vault anymore. It was out, and it was coming for every lie built inside it. The morning that the subpoenas were officially served, the air above Dalton Lux's global headquarters felt different, charged, alive, like static before a storm. But inside the sleek glass building, the tension had crystallized into resolve. Shaquille Dalton didn't wear armor, not visibly. He didn't stride through his offices with an entourage, nor did he indulge in dramatic declarations. But the people who worked beneath his banner felt something change when he passed. There was a new weight to his silence, a fire in his gaze that hadn't been there in years. The kind of look that came not just from betrayal, but from a man who had decided that his legacy was not up for compromise. He had spent weeks watching from the edges of the battlefield, strategizing, listening, letting facts take shape instead of rushing to judgment. But now, the time for precision was giving way to action. The first move came quietly. Two high-level resignations, framed as retirements, landed in inboxes across the executive suite. They belonged to individuals Loretta Vance had identified as key enablers in the vault's breach. Neither had been directly caught with evidence in hand, but both had failed to act on anomalies they were paid to monitor. Shaq had made it clear. Turning a blind eye was as damning as stealing. He watched their names disappear from the company roster without regret. Meanwhile, the legal case against Linda Hayes and Ethan Rowe escalated. International authorities had issued warrants for Rowe's arrest. Some of the stolen jewelry had already been located through private auctions in Dubai and Geneva. Others had vanished without a trace. But the damage was documented, the story substantiated. What had once been whispers had become front-page news. And through it all, Shaq remained steady, present but distant, speaking through action more than words. Until the day came when silence was no longer enough. Loretta entered his office with a press release in hand. "The recovery operation is being noticed, Shaq," she said. "You've turned the tide, but people need to hear from you." He took the paper from her, skimmed the carefully crafted paragraphs, then folded it in half and set it aside. "I'll speak in my own voice," he said quietly. That afternoon, in a live-streamed internal broadcast, Shaq stood before his employees. No podium, no teleprompter, just a single camera and the weight of his company's trust on the line. "I founded Dalton Lux," he began, "not because I wanted to make the most beautiful jewelry in the world, but because I believed in what beauty represents: commitment, trust, legacy." He looked directly into the lens, his voice clear, measured. Recently, that legacy was threatened, not by competition, not by a shifting economy, but from within. People we trusted made decisions that put our values second to profit, and while they may have believed they were above consequence, they were wrong. He paused, letting the weight settle. "I know many of you are hurt, confused, maybe even angry, and you have every right to be. But I want to tell you this, from the founder's chair, not as your CEO, But as the man who built this company brick by brick, this will not break us. It will define us. He ended the speech without fanfare. No applause track. Just a silence filled with truth. After the broadcast, the ripple was immediate. Employees who had begun to lose faith felt a quiet pride return. Clients who had been holding back came forward with renewed loyalty. Even media outlets previously circling like vultures shifted their tone. Shaq had done what few leaders dared. He had told the truth before it was forced from him. But action always followed his words. Over the next month, Dalton Lux underwent a transformation, not of branding, but of substance. Shaq instituted a new internal division, the Legacy Unit, tasked with ethical oversight, employee well-being, and customer transparency. It was staffed not with PR professionals or auditors, but with longtime employees, people who had been with the company before it became a household name, people who remembered what it was like when every client was family. He also made a personal investment, pulling from his private fortune to reacquire two of the stolen legacy pieces through quiet negotiations. When the Finmore flame, the red diamond piece created in honor of his late mother, was finally returned and reinstalled in the vault, Shaq stood alone before it. He didn't cry, but he closed his eyes and whispered, "Welcome home." Marcus and Loretta, now his most trusted advisors, continued their quiet work behind the scenes. They knew this wasn't just a cleanup, it was a rebirth. And rebirths weren't tidy. They came with fire. But what mattered was what rose from the ashes. And Dalton Lux was rising. A month later, Shaq received an invitation to speak at a global summit on corporate integrity, an event he had previously declined every year. This time, he said yes. On stage, before a crowd of thousands, he told a different story. Not about scandal, not about theft, but about how legacies aren't inherited, they're defended. Anyone can build an empire, he said, but not everyone knows how to protect one. Protecting something doesn't mean guarding it from outsiders. It means confronting what grows in the shadows, even when it's in your own house, especially then. The applause was real, but the real victory came later, in quieter ways. When a former employee reached out, saying they'd seen the new internal policies and wanted to return, when a client wrote that her grandmother's bracelet, lost in the scandal, had been recovered and returned with a handwritten apology, when the Finmore flame was viewed not as a symbol of what was nearly lost, but of what had been fought for, Shaquille Dalton never sought the spotlight. That's what made him different in a world obsessed with image. But when the time came, he didn't hide. He stood tall, and in doing so, he reminded every person watching that integrity is not a brand. It's a choice, made again and again, especially when it's hard, especially when no one is watching. Years later, Dalton Lux would be studied in business schools not just for its craftsmanship, but for its crisis response. Not just for the scandal it endured, but for the way its founder chose to lead. A legacy protected isn't a trophy, it's a promise, and Shaquille Dalton had kept his. The story of Shaquille Dalton, or Big Shaq as the industry once whispered, is one of power, silence, betrayal, and ultimately, transformation. His journey through the rise, unraveling, and restoration of Dalton Lux wasn't just the tale of a businessman uncovering corruption. It was the odyssey of a man confronting the legacy he thought he had already secured, only to discover that true legacy is not measured in wealth, but in courage, truth, and unwavering integrity. From the beginning, Shaq was an enigma. A billionaire built from grit and precision, he operated in the shadows, his presence felt but rarely seen. He built Dalton Lux from nothing, from a dream, a promise to his late mother, and a relentless drive to craft something timeless. And for years, it worked. The company grew into a global empire, a name synonymous with luxury and elegance. But beneath the polish, a fault line was quietly forming. Shaq had trusted others to uphold the standards he had built. That was his first mistake. When whispers of financial discrepancies surfaced, he didn't look away. He returned to the front lines of his own empire, disguised and determined, seeking truth the only way he knew how, by stepping directly into the fire. What he discovered wasn't just theft, it was rot, a deep betrayal from within. Linda Hayes, once a rising star within Dalton Lux, had aligned herself with outside forces, funneling rare jewels through illicit channels, hiding beneath a mask of loyalty and professionalism. Ethan Rowe, a name barely known within public records, turned out to be the silent hand moving stolen legacy pieces across borders. And even more painful were the complicit silences of high ranking executives who chose comfort over conscience. But instead of imploding or reacting with rage, Shaq did what only a true leader could. He planned. He watched. He gathered truth like a craftsman cuts stone, slowly, precisely, without cracking under pressure. He didn't lash out publicly. He let the evidence speak. And when it did, the sound echoed through the corridors of power. The takedown was swift, but the healing took time. Shaq didn't just remove those who betrayed the company's values. He rebuilt the system that allowed the betrayal in the first place. He formed the Legacy Unit, a group not built for optics but for truth-telling. He invested not only money, but time and presence into reconnecting with every level of his workforce. He returned stolen heirlooms with handwritten apologies. He made himself seen. In doing so, he redefined what power looks like. Shaq had always believed in control, tight, quiet control. But what he learned is that real control doesn't come from secrecy. It comes from transparency, from confronting the uncomfortable, from letting the world see you fall and then watching you stand up stronger, unbroken. And therein lies the lesson. You can build something grand, a company, a reputation, a life, but if you do not guard its foundation with truth, it will collapse when tested. The legacy you leave behind is not in your wins. It's in how you respond when everything you built is threatened. Shaq responded with integrity. He didn't just protect his empire, he restored faith in it. For every viewer watching this, whether you're a business owner, an employee, a dreamer, or someone who's been wronged, take this to heart. The world will always test your values. People will disappoint you. Systems will falter. But the one thing you control is how you respond. Do you run or do you rise? In a time where silence is often chosen over conflict, Shaq chose the hard path, the right path. And because of it, his empire still stands, not untouched, but unshaken. Let this story be a reminder. Integrity isn't passive, it's a daily decision. If Shaq had stayed silent, Dalton Lux would have rotted from within. Instead, it became stronger, clearer in its purpose, more united in its mission. And now, its story is not one of scandal, but of redemption. Thank you for following this story to the end. If it moved you, inspired you, or even made you reflect on your own journey, we invite you to join us for more. Subscribe to this channel. Support our mission to bring more stories of justice, resilience, and truth to light. Your support helps us keep going, and as Shaq has shown us, when we stand for what's right, even in silence, the world listens.